Hi guys, welcome along to another installment of whatever it is I am experimenting with at the moment. Please note that this is not intended as a professional project, a documentary, or even a podcast. I'm just sharing some ideas as I get the urge to, and I maneuver through various things that I love. One of those, as I've discussed previously, being music. I grew up in a household where my grandfather adored music so much, we had it going pretty much most of the time. As long as Grandpa was around and as long as he wasn't out in the garden, and sometimes even when he was doing stuff in the garden, he would bring his radio out there and have it playing. Some of my favourite pastimes would involve my grandparents and me sitting in the garden, beautiful summer afternoons, enjoying some chilled treats while listening to the Italian or Greek radio. Even our breakfast times involved music, and the very last thing that would play before we went to bed, you guessed it, it was music. Grandpa wasn't much of a lover of television. He would fall asleep as soon as he sat in front of the TV, and I would think it was hilarious, only it now happens to me too, and it doesn't matter the time of day or night. As soon as I start watching something, I can barely keep my eyes open. I've always been more of a music person, and that's why I became a DJ later on. My pops was a wonderful man, very creatively oriented, and a great dancer. So you could say we have the music bug in our genes. Today, I'm going to talk to you about Michael Hutchence. I guess you could say he's a person who is very special to me, someone I grew up with. I came to Australia to live when I was 11 years old. I was born here, but my family moved overseas in southeastern Europe. I was schooled there as well, so I was about 11 when we returned to Australia to live indefinitely. And that was about the time when INXS was starting to be really huge. It was in the top 40, top 10. They're featured on the cover of most music magazines at the time, like Smash Hits Countdown and other popular publications. And they really caught my attention too, as a young and impressionable kid that I was, both because of their good looks and their music. The first song that stood out in my mind was Original Sin. It really impressed me. I heard it on the radio. Now I know that INXS was around since the late 70s, but I was far too young then, plus I was overseas. I sent a message, listen like thieves. That was my type of music. It felt like it happened overnight once they hit the 80s because they climbed the ladder of popularity really fast. Everybody was going mad over them, especially Michael Hutchence, with his charisma, mojo, energy, exciting and arty persona. That guy was destined to go places. He had the star quality in him. That thing that captivates the masses. Of course, the other guys in the band were very special too. Musical geniuses. It was inevitable that this band was going to become as big as it did. From what my memory allows me to recollect, because believe me, I've watched pretty much every documentary and everything on YouTube that I could get my hands on INXS. But what I recall is that Michael and the rest of the band saying that they kind of struggled at the beginning. When they were starting out, the rougher kind of bands like Cold Chisel are what were in demand and popular. The pub bands, so to speak. Jingle, jingle, jingle bell rock. I'm so sorry, no matter what I do, you can still hear my pendants jingling in the background. And, well, it sounds like Christmas and the reindeer haven't left our home yet. But yeah, when INXS were first appearing in pubs, the crowds were not taking a liking to them. Not only as an Australian, not only as a person who loves music so much, I just can't imagine any event or venue or anything that is celebratory existing without a song of INXS being played. Even in 2024, where venues are filled with young people, you won't get a band or an evening of festivities where the band or DJ won't include some INXS. Me living in my microcosm of Australia, so far isolated from the rest of the world, I had no idea I was in my oblivion about how huge INXS had become overseas. It took me actual decades becoming an adult to realize just how gigantically phenomenal they were in places like USA, UK, Asia, and other overseas destinations. I have watched some amazingly produced documentaries about INXS, including Mystify and also The Last Rockstar. I really enjoyed the experience of hearing his friends and people who knew him talk about Michael. Unfortunately, in all my years in the performing arts, radio, the nightlife, I never got to see INXS perform or to meet them. And of course, it becomes inevitable that when we lose someone, we keep playing scenarios over and over in our head. We keep analysing everything, and it doesn't matter if we were a friend, a colleague, an acquaintance, or just a fan. Each one of us examines the role that we played in their lives. We wish we could have done something to save them. It becomes part of the coping mechanism and the way in which we deal with grief. So, in our attempt of trying to process everything, we look for the ins and outs, what made a particular person tick, and what could have changed in order to have ensured that this individual was still here. With the recent passing of Matthew Perry, I heard people say, just let it go, don't look for reasons what caused it, you don't need to know. The man is gone, just respect that. But I think it's part of trying to reach closure that we need to make sense of things and to understand what caused the demise of a person, not because we want to accuse them, although some of us who are not as kind-hearted or open-minded tend to go down that route. In general, I don't think that we ever quite reach closure. We just try to make sense as best as we can of something when it's so impactful. It is very useful and educational to listen to different experts from various faculties give their opinion and why they have reached that conclusion on particular matters such as the passing of somebody as important as Michael Hutchence. I'm very grateful to the coroner, the medical examiner, who gave his reasons as to why he thinks that it was not erotic asphyxiation that caused the death of Michael. Not because I don't want to accept a concept like that, but because there are genuine reasons as to why I have travelled down that path of thought as well. His partner, Paula Yates, believed otherwise because they were very adventurous in the personal moments. We mustn't limit ourselves to circumstantial evidence though. Just because somebody engages in particular activity, it doesn't mean that their end came because of it. There is a possibility, but it doesn't necessarily mean, for example, that somebody who drives dangerously can't get murdered. Having considered all the details available, time after time, I surmise that Michael took his own life because there were too many elements stacking up against him. Please let me acknowledge that I understand just because I process and rationalize things in a particular way, it doesn't mean that Michael or the next person does as well. It doesn't mean that just because I am evaluating factors in Michael's life according to my life view, that he also assessed them similarly. Each individual experiences situations and people in their own way. I don't want to spoil other people's work, and there are many documentaries that give details. I urge you to go and watch them. But of course I have to make reference to specific information if I am to deduce why I have reached the opinion that I have. Of course, my opinion is editorial. It's just that. It's not fact. I have just put all the different bits and pieces together and have tried to make best sense out of them. Let us start from the final detail. The lyrics that Michael left us in his hotel room, the very last song that he scribbled on his notepad. It gave a glimpse into his psyche and the fact that he'd had enough of everything going on around him. The court case with Bob Geldof and Paula Yates in between them and the separation. Whatever pertained to the children and the property and all the finer print. The tabloids that were going crazy, speculating, skewing. They were all giving Michael a hard time and siding with Bob Geldof. They were painting Michael as the villain who separated a family. Bob Geldof was English and the darling of the UK. Of course they were going to side with him and go against the seen as homewrecker Michael Hutchence, who was reckless, who had an altercation with some guy overseas and he got knocked over. They didn't see that Michael had no control over the other man's actions. They didn't care about any part of this. They just saw Michael, the troublemaker. They didn't even pay attention to the fact that the poor man lost his sense of smell and taste. He suffered a brain injury and his life got impacted quite dramatically after that. He could no longer enjoy his food, and for somebody who was as busy of thought and feelings, a visceral individual, a man of deep emotion and excitement, and now he couldn't even smell the scent of his own baby, as documentaries have informed us. And I don't mean to steal the work of other people, but I must repeat it here in order to give you the idea as to why I reached the conclusions that I did. All of those reasons became an accumulation of boiling points that just escalated and were conspiring against Michael Hutchence in tabloid form, in the opinion of the people. And believe me, the popularity of INXS started slipping a little bit after all that. One would tend to think that people would be a little bit more clever than to believe and buy into what the tabloids are saying. But unfortunately, we do have our opinion affected quite significantly by what we read in print or electronic format, by what we hear in broadcast, and even through other people. There was also the incident with that Oasis band member who made horrible remarks at the awards against Michael and INXS as has-beens, and that also impacted the way that he felt, his self-esteem. He was going through a downward spiral. To top it all off, as he was waiting for some good news with great anticipation that he would be able to see his family over the Christmas holidays and feel some kind of alleviation, some kind of soothing to his emotional and psychological turmoil, he received bad news over the phone that Bob Geldof said no, the children couldn't travel outside the UK, and that meant that Paula and Tiger Lily couldn't come to Australia. Imagine spending Christmas without your loved ones, without your child, who is the most important person in the world to you. On top of that, there had been a barrage of negative reports in the media against Michael, and they didn't relent. They depicted the frontman of INXS as the disgusting homewrecker who hurt the man responsible for Band-Aid. Let's recap. The English people now see Michael Hutchence as the reckless troublemaker who interfered in and destroyed the personal family life and happiness of iconic superstar Bob Geldof. The Aussie singer gets involved in an altercation overseas, which they immediately point to as evidence of his terrible character. INXS's popularity declines a little given the negative reports coming out from the UK media. Opinions around the world are also influenced. Legal and familial problems with Bob Geldof seemed insurpassable. His relationship with Paula Yates was in trouble. We're not talking about small problems, but huge obstacles that Michael needed to overcome. I'm sure it got a little bit too much for him, as it would for any person. Michael suffers a brain injury after he is assaulted by a taxi driver overseas. He loses part of his sensory functioning, which severely impacts his quality of life. I acknowledge that Michael was enjoying himself and was in very good spirits when he had dinner with his family the night before he passed away. Things can change in an instant, especially within the mind of a person with very busy thoughts. What followed dinner with his parents on his final evening was the catalyst. As the night progressed, he was waiting for news from the UK regarding his Christmas holiday, whether he would be able to spend it with his family or not. Negative information reached him. He had worked up quite a frustration, having unpleasant conversations with people in England. His relationship with Paula Yates had been a troubled one for quite some time. It may have all seemed futile, pointless. His thoughts were clouded by the use of alcohol, medication and substances. Alcohol is a depressant. It may numb things out for a little while, so your thoughts get a little bit blurred, but in the long run, it leads you down a downward depressing spiral. I'm talking from experience. I never became dependent on alcohol, but I would reach out to it throughout my life in order to filter thoughts out that I just couldn't cope with. Emotions, events, problems, realizations, all got too much for me, and I needed a little bit of a way out, even for a brief moment. The aftermath was not worth it. My issues were only made bigger by the consumption of this substance. Because of the implications that alcohol has on the body, your metabolism has to work super hard to process alcohol, the toxins it produces and byproducts within your system, and in order for everything to reach a balance again, there's quite a biological process necessary. I can't even begin to describe to you how intense, how severe things got inside my mind when in this intolerable state. 9 times out of 10 I felt deeply depressed as I slowly came to and faded away from intoxication. My problems and everything that made me sad seemed a lot worse now, more hopeless and without possible resolution than the night before drinking. I do appreciate that everybody experiences situations differently. The effects of an agent in a body, though, are pretty much uniform across the spectrum, and if it's present in somebody's system at the same time as other substances like medication and other opiates, who knows how much worse the experience may be. If I reached such rock bottom levels psychologically and physically when under the influence of alcohol and trying to get over it, I can only imagine that other people who had secondary substances introduced to the bodies having a lot more complications and negative symptoms. On all levels of your awareness or existence, you feel unwell. Your body wants to throw up and expel whatever you've introduced into it, even if it was alcohol alone. You feel physically ill, weak, just like when you have the flu, but a lot worse. Whatever problem you had pre-existing before, alcohol blurs it for a few hours, and then it comes back to haunt you, dare I say, 100-fold. I felt so bad when under the grasp of alcohol and trying to expel it from my body, trying to overcome its effects, that I would call out to God to end things for me, to end life for me. As physically sick as I felt, it wasn't the physical side that was intolerable, more the psychological and emotional. It seemed pointless and as if there was no way out, because of the depressive cycle alcohol sent me upon. For the next 24 to 36 hours, this state would persist, although it would fade. I imagine anybody who may be experiencing an exacerbated state of mind or emotions while under the influence of alcohol or trying to overcome it, to please hold out. Tomorrow or other days will be better. This I promise. They can't be any worse than what currently is going on. By ending things, you don't know what opportunities the future may result to or open up to for you. No matter how futile everything seems to be at the moment, I urge you, you are not thinking clearly. This is not a time to be making irreversible decisions. So, although Michael Hutchence may have been running a bath, maybe as a means to calm himself down, to distract himself and to relax, the state inside his head may have escalated over a few very brief but dangerous moments. And although I know that his love for his child would have been paramount in his mind, maybe the mental suffering momentarily got so bad that he wanted to silence his thoughts, even if for just a brief while. Sometimes when things get that bad, people will do anything to escape from them. No amount of coercion, description or narration can concisely communicate to you just how severe my emotional and mental duress was during such experiences with alcohol. So why would I revisit drinking sessions in the future? Because when life got too complicated, I forgot about the moments of duress during the coming down from alcohol, which may sound crazy and unbelievable, but nevertheless was the truth. It's not unrealistic for me to imagine what process Michael Hutchence may have gone through that night, especially since he was under a lethal cocktail of multiple substances. Who knows what adverse effect they would have had on his body and his mind in conjunction with one another. During such times, the worst thing is for a person to be on their own. And after Michael's friends left his hotel room, he was trying to reach out to other people who were unreachable. One of the accounts I heard was that one friend was available and would have been on her way over a little bit later on. I'm somewhat unclear about the particulars of that meeting, because if he was catching up with someone, why was that friend trying to call him at about 10 o'clock or so and there was no answer, unless it was a different contact altogether who was trying to reach him at that time? We weren't present, and so we will never know exactly what went on. In my esteem, erotic asphyxiation is more of a conspiracy theory than homicide. As the coroner reported, during erotic asphyxiation, there is evidence of bodily fluids, none of which were present on Michael. I wouldn't rule out foul play by far. It came to my attention that Michael's dad had made some very concerning comments about disappearing funds and the state of Michael Hutchence after his passing. Where there are wealthy people involved, there are a lot of vested interests of different individuals who stand to gain after a person's death. Now, I'm not talking about his music and his instruments that were locked away in vaults all around the world and made an appearance in the documentary The Last Rockstar. I'm pretty sure that's the film they made an appearance in and that his friends spoke about. They also featured footage of their opening and the first public appearance since Michael had locked them away. I'm talking about other money and property which disappeared and his family never got a part of. I'm sure there were other people who wanted him out of the way too. Homicide is a very real possibility in Michael Hutchence's case as an alternative to his death, and way before erotic asphyxiation forms part of the picture. Thank you for tuning in, everybody. I'm academically trained in the field of journalism. My ideals, though, did not coincide with the reality of the professional world. I didn't want to compromise my ethics, and so I'm not currently working in media. Please take care, everyone, and remember to always do what's right. We'll talk again soon.